On July 8, 2014, at Varna Airport in Bulgaria, 28-year-old German tourist Lars Mittank was captured on CCTV sprinting through the terminal. He was wearing a yellow t-shirt, dark shorts, and sneakers. At first glance, he looked like just another traveler rushing to catch a flight. But he wasn't rushing toward anything. He was running away. Lars burst through the airport's sliding glass doors without warning. He left everything behind: his backpack, his wallet, his phone, and even his passport. For reasons still unknown, he ran straight across the paved entrance and onto the surrounding grounds of the airport. Security footage tracked him as he crossed a service road, approached the perimeter fence, and scaled it. The fence stood over 2 meters high and was topped with barbed wire. But Lars didn't hesitate. He climbed over it and disappeared into a nearby field of sunflowers, which bordered a dense stretch of forest. That was the last confirmed sighting of him. No one has seen Lars Mittank since. His disappearance triggered international headlines and drew the attention of online sleuths, missing persons investigators, and mental health experts alike. The final moments caught on tape became one of the most widely viewed and debated pieces of surveillance footage on the internet. His belongings were never claimed. His passport was never used again. And no trace of him has ever turned up. Not a phone signal, not a bank transaction, not a confirmed sighting. What makes this case so disturbing is that Lars didn't vanish in the middle of the night. He disappeared in broad daylight at a public airport surrounded by people, and without a single clear reason why. Some believe he was experiencing a psychological breakdown. Others suspect foul play. But all that exists are questions. And the last known truth of Lars Mittank is this: he ran from something. Whether that something was real or imagined remains at the center of one of the most baffling missing persons cases of the 21st century. Before his name became linked to one of Europe's most mysterious disappearances, Lars Mittank was an ordinary young man from northern Germany. Born in 1986 and raised in the town of Itzehoe, Lars lived a quiet, stable life. He worked as a technician at a power plant, held a steady relationship, and spent weekends with friends watching football. He was especially devoted to his favorite team, Werder Bremen. Lars was an only child, and those closest to him described him as mild-mannered, soft-spoken, and dependable. His personality leaned more toward introverted than impulsive. He was the type of person who didn't draw attention, someone grounded and rational. He was also deeply attached to his family. After his father suffered a serious stroke in 2012, Lars often traveled over 100 miles on weekends to help his mother care for him. His commitment to family was unwavering. In fact, it was his mother, Sandra Mittank, who encouraged him to take a rare vacation with friends in the summer of 2014, a 1-week trip to Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. It would be his first time traveling outside of Germany. There were no warning signs that anything was wrong. Lars had no known history of mental illness, no encounters with the police, and no involvement with drugs. By every measurable standard, he was a stable young man with a promising future. His employer described him as reliable. His friends called him generous and loyal. He was the kind of person who stayed out of trouble, who checked in with his mom regularly, and who rarely missed work. That sense of normalcy is part of what makes his disappearance so difficult to understand. Nothing in Lars' background suggested that he would someday flee an airport in a full sprint and vanish into the woods. There were no behavioral issues, no psychological red flags, no patterns of instability. He wasn't a drifter. He wasn't reckless. He had responsibilities, and he took them seriously. This sharp contrast between the man Lars was and the way his story ended is one of the core reasons why his case haunts so many people. It challenges the assumption that mental breakdowns come with clear warnings, or that people snap only after years of pressure. Lars wasn't at a breaking point, at least not publicly. He was, by all accounts, in a good place, healthy, social, and employed. And yet, In the span of a few days, something changed, something powerful enough to unmake him. Understanding what happened begins with tracing his final days, starting with a seemingly harmless disagreement on a summer night in Bulgaria. In late June 2014, Lars traveled to Golden Sands, a popular resort town on Bulgaria's Black Sea coast, with a group of close friends. The trip was typical for young Europeans: beach during the day, bars at night, and little concern beyond enjoying the sun. According to his friend Paul Roman, Lars seemed relaxed and in good spirits. But on the night of July 6th, just one day before they were all scheduled to fly back to Germany, something shifted. That evening, while at a bar, Lars got into a brief argument with a group of other German tourists. The disagreement was over football. Lars was a loyal Werder Bremen fan. The others supported Bayern Munich, a rival team. Friends later said it wasn't a major confrontation, just a bit of verbal tension that quickly passed. But later that night, after the group left a restaurant, Lars became separated from his friends. For hours, no one knew where he was. He didn't return to the hotel that night, and by morning, his friends were starting to worry. When Lars finally reappeared the next day, something was different. He told his friends he had been attacked. The story he told was vague and unsettling. He said he had been beaten up by 4 men, the same ones from the bar, or possibly by someone they had hired. His friends noticed he had visible injuries, most notably pain in his ear, which would later be diagnosed as a ruptured eardrum. There were also indications he had suffered a possible concussion or jaw trauma. But as details emerged, inconsistencies in Lars's story began to surface. His friends couldn't agree on what he had said. Some recalled that he blamed the men from the bar. Others said he claimed a local Bulgarian man had been paid to assault him. These discrepancies were minor on their own, but they were the first signs that something might be unraveling. Despite his injuries, Lars initially insisted he was fine. A doctor in Bulgaria examined him and confirmed the eardrum rupture. He was prescribed an antibiotic, either cefprozil or cefuroxime 500, and told not to fly due to the risk of further inner ear damage during cabin pressure changes. At this point, Lars made a fateful decision. His friends offered to stay behind with him, even suggesting they all postpone their flight home. Lars refused. He told them to go. He said he'd be okay on his own. That would be the last time they ever saw him. This moment, when Lars chose to remain in Bulgaria by himself, marked a turning point. Whether his story of being attacked was accurate or a distortion caused by a developing mental crisis, one thing was now certain: he was injured, alone, and psychologically vulnerable in a foreign country. After parting ways with his friends, Lars checked into the Hotel Color in Varna, a low-budget option not far from the airport. It was meant to be a temporary stay, just until he was cleared to fly. But what happened during the next 24 hours would raise the most disturbing questions of the entire case. Lars began making calls to his mother almost immediately. But they weren't normal check-ins. His voice was hushed, urgent. He told her he was being followed. He claimed that 4 men were trying to kill him. He begged her to cancel his credit cards. Lars Mittank, alarmed, did exactly that. In her later interviews, Sandra said she could hear his heart pounding through the phone. Security footage from the hotel captured Lars pacing nervously in the hallways. He peered out of windows. He rode the elevator up and down, seemingly checking to see if someone was following him. At one point, he even hid in the elevator. Yet the cameras showed no one else. No threats, no attackers. Just Lars, terrified and completely alone. Around 1 a.m., Lars suddenly left the hotel. Where he went for the next hour remains a mystery. He returned shortly before 2 a.m., more agitated than before. Again, no one saw who he was with, if anyone. There were no witnesses, no records. The sense of paranoia seemed to intensify. He called his mother again and said they were getting closer. He also sent her a text asking about the antibiotic he had been prescribed. What is cefuroxime 500? The message was short, but telling. It suggested he was suspicious of the medication, or possibly unsure if he should take it. This is one of the few moments in the timeline that bridges physical reality and psychological suspicion. Either Lars was worried the drug was harming him, or he believed it was part of a plot against him. In either case, the line between rational fear and delusion had started to blur. No one could verify whether Lars actually took the antibiotic. Some reports say he never filled the prescription. If true, it challenges the theory that a bad reaction to the medication caused his breakdown. If it wasn't the drug, what was it? The behavior at Hotel Color is chilling because of how isolated it was. There was no confrontation, no visible threat, just Lars, trapped in a state of fear that seemed to come from within. The security footage presents a man hunted by something invisible. And the most unsettling part? He believed it completely. These were the final hours before his disappearance, and whatever had taken hold of his mind was now in full control. By morning, Lars made a choice that gave his mother hope. He called a taxi and headed to the airport, but that hope would vanish just as suddenly as he would. On the morning of July 8, 2014, Lars Mittank arrived at Varna Airport in a taxi. He texted his mother to let her know he had made it there. For a brief moment, it seemed like things might return to normal. He was finally going home. But even during the taxi ride, there were signs that his mental state hadn't improved. A woman who shared the ride later reported that Lars looked uneasy. His pupils were dilated, and he was acting strangely, tense, distracted, unsettled. Before boarding, Lars needed medical clearance to fly due to his ear injury. He visited the airport's medical clinic, where he met Dr. Kostov, the attending physician. According to Dr. Kostov, Lars was extremely anxious. He paced. He trembled. His questions revolved around the antibiotic he had been prescribed days earlier. Despite Lars's demeanor, Dr. Kostov assured him he was medically fit to fly. He said Lars appeared physically fine, and the ear injury wasn't a concern anymore. But that didn't calm him. Then, something triggered the final, irreversible moment. As the airport was undergoing renovations, a construction worker entered the medical room, a man in a hard hat. That's all he was. But to Lars, he was something else. Something dangerous. Lars stood up abruptly, his entire body shaking. He turned to Dr. Kostov and shouted the last words anyone would ever hear from him. "I don't want to die here. I have to get out of here." Then he ran. He sprinted out of the medical office, leaving everything behind: his passport, wallet, phone, and backpack. Just like that, his identity was left in a heap on the floor. CCTV captured what happened next. Lars ran through the terminal, past passengers and check-in counters. He didn't stop at the exit. He didn't hesitate. Once outside, he crossed the airport grounds, scaled a tall barbed wire fence, and vanished into a sunflower field next to the forest. The entire sequence took just minutes. And then, nothing. The construction worker, investigators confirmed, had no interaction with Lars. There was no confrontation, no threat. Just an everyday man doing his job. But to Lars, it was the final signal that he needed to escape. Dr. Kostov later added one final detail that continues to fuel debate. He said, to his knowledge, Lars had never filled the prescription for cefuroxime. That meant he may not have taken a single dose. If that's true, the idea that his behavior was triggered by a rare side effect becomes much harder to support. What really caused him to run? What terrified him so deeply that he abandoned everything and disappeared? Whatever the answer is, it left no trace, no clue, just a few minutes of surveillance footage and an empty space where a man once stood. Lars Mittank's disappearance has sparked countless theories, from grounded psychological explanations to the speculative and sensational. But despite years of investigation, none can fully explain every detail of his case. One of the most prominent theories suggests Lars suffered an acute psychotic episode. Known medically as a brief psychotic disorder, this condition can emerge suddenly in individuals with no prior mental health history. Triggers can include stress, trauma, injury, or even a reaction to medication. In Lars's case, the rupture of his eardrum, the physical assault, the isolation, and possibly even the heat and foreign environment may have contributed to a sudden collapse in his psychological stability. Supporters of this theory point to the timeline. Within a few days, Lars went from enjoying a vacation with friends to fleeing invisible threats and abandoning all his belongings. His paranoid phone calls, erratic behavior at the hotel, and panic at the sight of a construction worker all suggest a mind overwhelmed by delusion. However, this theory becomes complicated by one detail. If he never filled or took the antibiotic prescription, the possibility of drug-induced psychosis becomes much weaker. And while sudden onset psychosis is real, it's rare for it to occur without any prior warning signs or later resurfacing in some form. Another theory proposes that Lars was being targeted, perhaps by someone he encountered during the fight, or possibly involved in something unknown during his missing hours from the hotel. His repeated mention of 4 men and his belief that someone was following him could indicate a real threat that no one else perceived. But this theory lacks supporting evidence. There's no indication from security footage, eyewitnesses, or police reports that anyone else was involved. His phone showed no suspicious calls, no tracking, no credible threats ever materialized. Then there's the idea of voluntary disappearance, that Lars staged his own vanishing. But this contradicts nearly every part of his known personality. He left behind all forms of identification, his means of communication, and even the money he had. There was no preparation, no plan, just panic. More extreme theories include organ trafficking, criminal abduction, or even espionage, but these ideas rely heavily on speculation and lack hard evidence. Investigators have never found anything to suggest organized crime was involved, and again, no trace of Lars has ever turned up. Perhaps the most unsettling possibility is also the simplest, that Lars, in a moment of severe psychological crisis, fled into the wilderness and died. The forests near Varna are vast. If he became disoriented or injured, his remains could have gone undetected. Search teams combed the area, but terrain and time work against even the most coordinated efforts. To this day, his disappearance remains one of Europe's most haunting unsolved cases. There is no official cause, no resolution, and no closure. The image of Lars sprinting from the airport lingers, a man consumed by fear, running from something no one else could see. And whatever he was running from, it hasn't been found either. If you have any information about Lars Mittank, or if you believe you may have seen him, contact your local authorities or visit official missing persons registries. Share his story. Someone, somewhere, might hold the missing piece.